Hi students, this is Professor Marimel Berberena. In this lecture, I will be talking about the Afro-Puerto Rican history from the perspective of African people, African culture, taking into account how, why, when they arrived to Puerto Rico, and what has been the impact on Puerto Rican nation, culture, and society. Please note that this is an introduction, and most of the information that you will see here comes from my dissertation that has a larger outlook of what I'm about to present here. First, let's take into account the concept of Sankofa from the Akan culture of Africa of what today is Ghana. The concept of Sankofa means to go back and fetch it, essentially, to go back and fetch those roots of your culture. In this case, we're talking about Puerto Rican culture, and in this lecture, we're talking about the African roots. That doesn't mean we're ignoring the fact that the Taino people also impacted Puerto Rican nation and society, as well as the Spanish culture. But in this case, we're focusing on the African element. As is the case of many Caribbean countries, many Africans came to Puerto Rico due to slavery. Even though the majority of Africans that arrived to Puerto Rico came through slavery, there were many that arrived directly from Spain because they had been born or raised in Spain. They already had been adapted to the Spanish culture, and they were already Christian, and they had been granted freedom before arriving to Puerto Rico, or simply were free and had been born in Spain but had African ancestry. Those were called or are called Negros Ladinos in the Hispanic literature. This is opposite to the Negros Bozales, who were the ones that came directly from Africa through slavery against their will. In the case of the Negros Ladinos, we have the example of Juan Garrido, or the Black Conquistador, who was the first black person to have been recorded to arrive to Puerto Rico in 1508. To a lesser extent, we also have the Maroons, who were formerly enslaved Africans that escaped slavery in Puerto Rico and many other Caribbean and Latin American countries. I say lesser extent because Puerto Rico does not have a significant amount of recorded Maroon sites. However, we can take that with a grain of salt because of something I'm going to say in the next slide. Later on, after slavery had been abolished in Puerto Rico in 1863, many African descendants came to Puerto Rico from other Caribbean islands, such as Saint Kitts and Nevis, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. Among the findings that I present in my dissertation, I am going to highlight the main ones for you. One of them is that the Afro-Puerto Rico culture stems from different historical and geographical sources. As I mentioned before, Africans came not just from West Africa, but also from Spain and from other Caribbean countries. And this was during the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and even the 20th century. The most significant groups, although it was a lot of ethnic groups that arrived to Puerto Rico, are the Bantu, the Efik Ibibio, Yoruba, Akan, Ormande. Surprisingly, even though this is still up to debate, when we see the census that were taken during the 18th century and the 19th century, we saw that the majority of people had African descent. That doesn't mean that they were black, but that they did have African descent. But due to the process of blanqueamiento that took place during the 19th century, especially at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, the black population of Puerto Rico significantly decreased. That does not mean that they disappear completely. There is a lot of black people in Puerto Rico. But even though when you see that today's census of Puerto Rican people, you don't see a significant black population. This is also due to self-loading. A lot of people that are actually black do not identify as black in the census, and considering the fact that we use the U.S. Census categories that does not take into account the fact that Puerto Rico has a complex racial background. If you have ever gone to Puerto Rico, you know that San Juan has a town called Santurce. Well, Santurce was actually part of a larger town that was originally called San Mateo de Cangrejos. This town was founded by free black people, most of which came from other Caribbean countries that came to Puerto Rico looking for freedom, and that were promised that freedom if they converted to Christianity and served the military for what was back then the Spanish crown. In theory, maroon sites are communities that were developed and founded by free black people or formerly enslaved Africans that escaped slavery. In this case, San Mateo de Cangrejos can actually be considered a maroon site that continues to exist today through Santurce, even though the literature, the historical literature, often says that Puerto Rico had no maroon communities. On the left, you will see a list of revolts that occurred in the 18th century and the 19th centuries across the island of Puerto Rico. The majority of them happened due to internal issues of enslaved Africans that wanted to liberate themselves or at least to cause some trouble to the slave owners. However, a few of these happened after the Haitian Revolution because they heard about it and they were inspired by it. When we talk about African practices in Puerto Rico, or practices that are known to be Puerto Rican but that have an African influence, we have to remember that there's no geographic or ethnic origin to trace these practices to, due to what I explained earlier, the fact that many Africans arrive from different points in time or different places or different areas, such as Spain, West Africa, and the Caribbean. We also have the fact that practices that have been associated to African descendants in Puerto Rico were not originated from Africa. They were not actually African. They came from a non-African origin, mostly from Spain, but that were adopted in Puerto Rico by African descendants, such as the Behigante mask and the spiritual practice called Espiritismo. Other customs like children's tales as the Jicotea y el Caballo or the turtle and the horse, the tiger and the rabbit, and Aunt Nancy or Compay Araña come from a mix of African regions or from the interactions with the global African diaspora. Some of these were adopted in the 20th century by Puerto Rican people who admire African culture, but that doesn't mean these practices or customs were developed through the ethnohistory, meaning from those enslaved Africans that later were established in Puerto Rico. I hope that makes sense. I will now invite you to take a look at these slides and the following slides to see the impact of the African culture in Puerto Rico in today's Puerto Rico. We have bomba. We can see bomba in many cultural events in Puerto Rico, even in political events and protests. As I mentioned, we cannot trace specifically what ethnic group is to be credited for the creation of bomba because it was really originated in Puerto Rico by enslaved Africans, but it does have influences that came directly from Africa, and the scholars have, most of the ethnomusicologists have claimed that the origins are probably Bantu, but this is really hard to confirm when we talk about centuries of development. And even the bomba of the 300 years ago is not the same as now. We have this, for example, this is a feminist protest, and there were many women that were playing the barril, which is something different as the bomba, the original bomba, if we could put it that way, because originally it is the men that play the drum or the barril, and the women are the ones that dance and set the pace for the rhythm. Next is a list of many Afro-Boricuas. This is just a list of some of them because there's many Black Puerto Rican people that we can talk about, but this is just so you have an idea and that you look further into it. For example, we have musicians such as Andy Montañez, Teo Calderón, Ismael Rivera or Maelo, baseball player Roberto Clemente, and the famous poet Julia de Burgos. Many Afro-Puerto Rican people have impacted Puerto Rican history through politics, education, and literature, such as Ramón Emeterio Betances, who was key in the Grito de Lares, because he founded the Grito de Lares, and he liberated many enslaved Africans because he had the money to do so, but he himself had African ancestry. We have Pedro Albizu Campos, who was a leader of the independence movement, and we have Rafael Cordero, the father of the public education in Puerto Rico. We also have people that exist today, that are alive today, such as Mayra Santos Febres, who is a renowned novelist, writer, activist, and academic. She's also actually the director of the Center of Race and Afrodescendencia, or African Descents, in Puerto Rico, in the University of Puerto Rico. We also have Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. If you've ever gone to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, you will see that it is in the name of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who was born in Puerto Rico in 1874 and is called the father of the global diaspora, as well as the father of Black history, because he was prominent during the Harlem Renaissance era at recovering information, documents, history books, archives of Black people across the Americas. And this is very important because he also talked about the importance of the African diaspora unity. When we consider that many Puerto Ricans have African ancestry, there are many Puerto Ricans that are not Black but that have contributed to the culture from the standpoint of the African element, meaning admiring that aspect of the culture or even developing it. And we have people like Tito Puente, Hector Lavoe, Luis Pales Matos, and now we can say Bad Bunny and his last album that sampled salsa, merengue, bomba, and plena, all of which stem from that African influence in Puerto Rico. Here's some books that you can look into if you're interested in learning more about the Black Puerto Rican history in Puerto Rico. Now, connecting this lecture to other units and other topics that we have discussed or about to discuss, this book by Jose Luis Gonzalez, El País de Cuatro Pisos, or The Country of Four Levels. I'm not sure if there's any translation to it in English, but if you do know Spanish, I encourage you to read it at some point. It's short but very profound. It talks about the different stages that make what Puerto Rico is today. One is the first floor or the first stage, basically indicating that Puerto Rico was born a Black and mulatto nation. The second stage is this 19th century and the impact of the European immigration that generated that blanqueamiento I mentioned earlier. The third stage was the U.S. invasion or the recolonization period that created a new nationalism. The fourth stage being the stage of the ELA or el Estado Libre Asociado, and the short-lived prosperity that we will see in the next unit. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you have questions, please use the discussion board. And also, you can read my chapter, Sankofa, to get more information on the Afro-Puerto Rican history and culture.